Welcome, tennis fans, to the 45th episode of Tennis Traverse, Exploring the Game, the podcast that delves into the heart of the tennis world. I'm your host, Ivy J. In today's episode, I will be talking about Wimbledon, and before we begin, please follow all of my social media, that is Instagram and Twitter, using @TennisTraverse, that is @TennisTraverse. If you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. If you are listening on other streaming platforms, please rate my show. And I do want to say that this episode's audio quality probably won't be the best, and it'll be on a shorter side just because I don't have my microphone with me and I don't have my iPad, so I can't really do the draw prediction like I did for Australian Open and French Open. So I will just be giving like a general preview. It's not going to be as specific, and I apologize, but I don't have my microphone on me, and I'm currently actually at a journalism camp, so I'm trying to maybe learn how to improve my podcast before till like July 19th. I won't be having sort of as good of a podcast as it was like in terms of sound quality and just content, because I don't have my microphone. I left my iPad, so I really don't have time, and my schedule is really packed for me to like predict everything, but I'll try my best to make it work. And I totally understand that you guys can just stop listening to my podcast because it's sort of like not as good as before just because I don't have my microphone on me. But let's just get right into today's episode, and I want to talk about the women's draw first for Wimbledon. And I think you guys know that from just listening to my podcast that between Australian Open and French Open, it was actually a long time. There was a long time between them, and there's just a lot of tournaments, for example the Rome Open, the Madrid Open. They're all practice tournaments that's setting the players up for the French Open. But after the French Open, we basically get half a month, and then we go right into Wimbledon, which is another major, but we really don't get a lot of time for the players to sort of adjust to the grass surface. And there isn't a Masters tournament, for example, because we don't have time. And there are a lot of 500 tournaments, but I just feel there isn't a lot of time for the players to adjust, and that is one thing that I feel is a huge challenge. But I want to start off with talking about the women's side first, and then we'll move on to the men's side. So because I don't have the whole draw written out, I think I just want to give some good matchups you guys can watch in round one, and then I will be predicting the winner. But I want to talk about Iga's first round against Sophia Kenin. I think this is a good matchup because Kenin is an incredible player, especially she won the 2020 Australian Open title, which was insane, and I think nobody expected her to win because going into it, I feel she's just ranked around the top 30 in 2020, and ever since her win, I feel she hasn't been on top of her game because of injuries, but I think she's been making a comeback. I'm pretty sure she went into the semifinals of an 1,000 tournament this year, so she's really trying to recover from her injury. And I think it's going to be interesting seeing her play against Iga Swiatek because Swiatek had such dominating clay court season. Obviously, Iga is just known for how she performs on clay, but I think she really her performance style don't really shine through on grass because the grass surface is known as one of the fastest surfaces. And I think Iga really, even though she does have a lot of power, I think she relies more on hitting angles. And I think when a player is able to hit the ball really fast using power, I feel Iga really can't compete, if that makes sense. So I think this will be an interesting matchup. And I guess the thing I'm trying to say is this tournament might not be as predictive as the French Open, just because Iga has won French Open 4 times in a row, and Iga hasn't won any Wimbledon titles at all, even though she's still one of the favorites because she's the number 1 ranked player in the whole world. But I think a lot of other players might have a chance of beating her on the French Open. And I also want to talk about another matchup, which is between Karolina Muchova and Paula Badosa. So I think both players suffered from injuries from the start of the season, and I would say that Muchova's injury was a longer period of time because she had a surgery on her wrist, so that's why it was such a long time. But I think she's slowly recovering, and I think that this will be an incredible matchup. And just because both of these players are ranked in the top 15 prior to their injury, so I think this will be an interesting matchup. The other matchup I want to talk about is between Mira Andreeva versus Brenda Fruhvirtova. So both of these players are really young, and Mira actually made it to the semifinals of French Open. So I think this will be a really interesting matchup because of how young both players are. Mira is only a day younger than me. She's born on April 29 of 2007. So it's really incredible how some young players are rising up and challenging the older ones, and I think seeing two younger players compete against each other is also a really interesting thing to see. And the other thing I want to mention is I am kind of curious as to how a lot of players such as Jasmine Paolini and Mira Andreeva, how they would perform on grass, because I feel like they don't get they're not as experienced on grass, and I think grass is a surface where you really need a lot of practice because you have to get used to sometimes the weird bounces and sometimes how fast the ball's coming at you. So I think a lot of these players there might be some upsets. If a player has been practicing on grass for a long time, they can easily beat someone who's even though ranked higher than them, but they haven't had as much experience, if that makes sense. And I do want to talk about another player, which is my favorite, Naomi Osaka. So she's actually playing against Diane Parry in the first round. I think she got in with a wild card because her protective racket doesn't really give her a spot anymore. But I think that she might go really far in this tournament because her draw is better than her draw in Roland Garros, where she literally played against Iga in round 2. But I think a potential matchup that might happen is her versus Emma Navarro, and I think it'll be an incredible matchup. I think Naomi does have a shot of winning it. And I want to talk about Naomi's preparation going into Wimbledon. So she actually participated in a grass court in 2 grass courts tournament because she hasn't been in Wimbledon since 2019. So it's such a long time of her not playing on a grass surface, which is really a surface that requires a lot of practice. So she played in a 250 tournament, I think in Berlin, and she went to the quarterfinal where she lost in the final set in a tiebreak against Bianca Andreescu with a score of 3-7. But apart from that, I would say that she's been performing well on grass in terms of how she normally performs, because she's really not a really big grass court player, but I think she's trying to find her rhythm again, because I think she can get really good on grass just because, as I said before, the grass court is one of the fastest surfaces, and from her just hitting the ball, I think it accelerates a lot of power because she her main, I feel weapon is how strong she is. So I think from getting more experience, I think she'll definitely do really well on grass. Okay, I do want to talk about one more player on the women's side, that is Aryna Sabalenka. So Sabalenka said before that she just haven't been 100%, and I think maybe, I guess, all the players will say that in a way, but I think she's gonna perform really well, and I think just the way she, I feel her fighting spirits is always there, even though maybe she might not feel 100%. I feel she always gives 100%, and this, I feel is a winnable tournament for her. Even though she won Australian Open, I think she is capable of winning this Wimbledon, just because as I said before, Iga really isn't as dominating as she was, and I guess other players such as Coco Gauff might also go really far, but I think like last year Arena made it to the semifinals, and I think she might make it as far, maybe even make it to the finals. And Ons Jabeur is also a really interesting player because she made it to the finals last year where she lost to Marketa Vondrousova, but I think she really is like struggling because she played in Berlin for the grass court championships, and she actually retired mid-match where she lost the first set against Coco Gauff. So I feel like Gauff is on her A game, and I think that it will be really interesting. Her first opponent is Caroline Dolehide, which is also an American, so I'm really interested to see the clash between these two. I think it will be amazing. And the other good thing is Jessica Pegula is playing, so we can see them pairing up as doubles partners again, which I love because I think both players are really good. Their chemistry is really good. Like, they have good doubles chemistry, so it'll be really fun to see what happens between these two. But that is that. And now let's talk about the men's side. I guess for the men's side, there really isn't that much to talk about. It's basically the same thing, I guess, as French Open, where I think it's just incredibly open. I think everyone has the capability of winning the tournament just because obviously Novak isn't as good as he was. This season just haven't been ideal for him. And apart from that, I would say that Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz, especially Carlos Alcaraz, just because of how he beat Novak last year on Wimbledon, and I think there will be pressure for him to defend his title, but at the same time, I feel like everyone doubts him because of they're like, you're putting too much pressure on him and he might like crumble, but I think he never did. I feel like he has a really strong mental game, and I think it will show through this tournament. The other thing I want to talk about is how Andy Murray is playing with his brother for the doubles tournament. I think that will be really interesting because I guess just both players, well, they're like obviously a pair, and it's probably going to be Andy Murray's last Wimbledon, which is really sad because think about it, I feel like when you think of Wimbledon, you think of Andy Murray just because of the big four and the legacy he leaves. So I think this will be an interesting tournament to see what will happen. But I do want to mention Sinner because I'm really interested to see how Sinner will do. I think he just I feel like he's better on grass than clay, but I think he made it to the semifinal last year and he lost to Novak Djokovic, but I think he is capable of making it further just because I believe he did play some grass tournament to prepare for himself. He played in the Halle Open and he actually won that tournament. He made it to the final where he beat Hubert Hurkacz with a score of 10-8 in the first tiebreak and 7-2 in the second tiebreak. So I feel like gaining momentum to prepare himself for Wimbledon, but I would say that this Wimbledon is extremely open. But the two players that I think might have a shot of winning is between Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz, just because both players are just incredible right now. And as for Novak Djokovic, he withdrew from Roland Garros because of a knee injury, and he did get his surgery done, but I think he said that the knee is looking good, but we don't know because it's obviously a huge surgery, and a part of tennis is you have to movement is super important, and a knee surgery is really detrimental because obviously you have to run back and forth, and it might not be good for your knee just because, well, you did surgery. So yeah, but I would say a lot of players that maybe haven't been performing that well is climbing up, such as Zheng Zhizhen, who is a player from China. He actually made it to the semifinals, which was really surprising to me because he beat Daniel Medvedev, and I think Daniil Medvedev is a great player on grass, but I think that this is still something that we should look forward to for Wimbledon, because I think Medvedev, he is number 5th seed, and even though he made it really far last year, I believe he made it to the semifinals, but I still think that it is interesting to see how he will do, because obviously he just lost in the round of 16 to Zhang Zhizhen, which is, in my opinion, not expected at all. So, unexpected. So I think this will be an interesting matchup, but I'm curious to see what will happen. And then I want to talk, I guess, about some just round 1 matchups. The first matchup I want to talk about is between Grigor Dimitrov versus Lajovic. So I really like this matchup because, the Lajovic is really good at serving, and Grigor, I feel like, is having one of his best years. So I think the matchup between them will be sort of dynamic, because Grigor is really good at running and just using his touch, whereas Lajovic is really good at serving. He's good at hitting big serves, big forehands, and big backhands. He's really good at power shots. So I think it will be really interesting to see how these two will do, and I think it'll be an entertaining match. But I do want to talk about one last person, and then we're gonna cut off this episode. So I want to talk about Chris Eubanks, because Chris Eubanks had a magical run last year. He made it to, I believe, the quarterfinals, where he lost against Medvedev, but I felt like his run was insane, because he beat Cameron Norrie, which is a British player, and then he beat Stefanos Tsitsipas, which is a top 10 player. So I think, even though his year so far hasn't been good, and if we really look at the grass court tournaments he played to prepare himself, he's been doing really badly. He lost in Halle against Zhang Zhizhen in the quarterfinals, but the good thing is he did beat Alexander Bublik, which is another incredible player. And then in Mallorca, he lost in round 1 against Mensik. So I think this will be sort of interesting, because I don't know what might happen, but his first round opponent is against Quinton Hayes. So I think it is interesting, and he will be playing doubles, which is interesting. He's going to play with Evan King, and they're going to play against a pair of British players. So I think it's really interesting to see how he does. But I think that is all for today's episode. I do want to say that I'm sorry my newsletter thing probably won't come out. If you guys listen to this episode, you probably know that the newsletter isn't out, because I'm not at home and I don't have time to write the newsletter. But apart from that, I think it's really good. If you guys haven't subscribed to my social media, please do so. It's at Tennis Traverse, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. Please rate my show on your streaming platform, and if you're listening on YouTube, comment, like, and subscribe. And I think I will be recording next week, but if I don't, next week is going to be the midpoint of Wimbledon, and I think overall my thoughts for Wimbledon is that it will be open, but I think the women's side will be more entertaining, just because of how I feel more open it is, because for French Open it is just one player. Before the whole tournament started, I think everyone know that Yuga's going to win, just I'm pretty sure that Yuga's going to win next year as well for French Open. But yeah, I think it will be really entertaining, and if I don't see you guys next week, just know that it will be a really interesting tournament, but I'll hopefully come back when I can. But yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Bye.